Check, check. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. Every year, our MFA candidates have the opportunity to present their research in process as we prepare for their thesis exhibitions. This year, we're able to host these special presentations here in the Kenderdine Gallery as part of our rounding project, which seeks to provide both learning and unlearning and really have an opportunity to unpack and decolonize learning practices overall. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you here to the very first of our presentations of the MFA research outcomes or in-process conversations for our cohort that will graduate in 2025. I'm also it's important for me to acknowledge that we are sitting here at USask, that is on Treaty 6 territory, and Treaty 6 territory is part of a long history of colonial agreements around land, its occupation, and division of resources that have been fraught and continue to be unpacked and reestablished as we get ready for cows and plows to be settled here in this region. It's really something that's on the top of mind, and we're watching conversations around shifting borders globally and across the planet. These kinds of agreements need to be reconsidered, brought to the fore, and considered fully as to what it means to enter into a reciprocal engagement with another people, what it is to be of the land, and how we are the land. So I want to acknowledge specifically that this space is, Treaty 6 territory, is the lands of the Nehiyawak, the Muskekawak, Nihitao, Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, Soto, Anishinaabe, Dene, and Métis. And this ancestral homelands of the Métis is an important acknowledgement because recognizing the naming of land and who is here, when and how, allows us to begin a conversation, though that acknowledgement alone is inadequate. We know actions must be taken, and hopefully gathering together in conversation that looks at these difficulties in ways that allows us to enter into them, hopefully anew, is something that we are able and willing to do. So I will pass on from this welcome to Alison Glenn, who is the supervisor of today's speaker, and I will invite Alison Glenn, associate professor. You want to just take it by hand, or you want to?
I think, yeah, I'll take it by hand.
Okay.
Because that way you can hear me, my tiny voice. Okay. So I'm just going to give a really brief introduction for Nasli. I quickly wrote this last night, so hopefully it's coherent. So when Nasli entered the MFA program, she proposed to make artworks that could evoke ideas around well-being, to better understand self for the purpose of healing that harvests composure, serenity, and solace. That's something that she wrote in her application package. Since she's been here, her creative research has led her to psychoanalysis, which could be described as a mining of the psyche to reframe memory and thinking. In the wake of many hours of psychoanalysis is the void, and this too became her obsession. With this intent in mind, she initiated her program painting self-portraits, wrapped and tangled with other bodies, on panels, canvas, and other found materials. They were descriptive, and she made many of them. A year into the program, all this rendering, however, made her very unhappy. And the pictorial images presented answers, but the thing that inspired her the most was questions. What Nasli was going through was a pivotal phase in the artist's journey, a moment where she found equilibrium and the value in uncertainty. And sorry, I'm just writing. Okay. It is what the artist's journey is all about. It's the importance of ambiguity, and ambiguity can be poetry in art. It is unrecognizable, it's undefinable, its origin indescribable and unknown. It can also be a trigger for agency, since that which evokes the most emotion or fear is that which is invisible, that which we can imagine seen lurking behind the door. In this respect, Naslie's obsession with psychoanalysis, the mining of the psyche, and self led her to create an object, most recently, that encompassed this idea. Some of you saw her installation in the Gordon Snellgrove Gallery a couple of weeks ago. Thank you for attending. I would describe it as a work in progress, since minus its descriptive title, it has the potential to be an indescribable thing, ambiguous but evoking meaning not easily explained. In her evolution within the program and within this piece, Nasli has begun to present her subject and materials in forms entirely unexpected. In embracing art and the creative process as philosophy, and with materiality at the forefront of her practice, she is on the home stretch for her thesis exhibition, and with her ideas in sync with process and materials. Here to share and talk about her creative process in the MFA program is Nasli Tapia. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Jake, and thanks, Alison, for the great introduction you provide. And thanks, everyone, for coming here today. Okay, I'm gonna start with a little telling about my story and my process, and then I'm gonna show you some of the work I did before I'm starting my MFA and the work I did in my MFA so far. So, yeah. Since I can remember, I've always been curious about myself. I was always taught that I'm different. It was the only thing that was clear to me. I thought in my head a lot about how I felt, and sometimes I could explain it well. But actually getting it to come out of my mind was so hard, and I was not open to many people as I was usually quiet. I've been dealing with depression for as long as I can remember. My entire life, I've been fighting a war. I was in so much pain and sadness, and I was always trying to learn how I could fix it. I realized my problem was that I didn't know how to talk about all the voices in my head, so I had to find a way to express it, or even just quiet my mind. As it always felt like thousands versions of me were talking at the same time, it became like a necessity and need. I've always liked doing art. The very first professional thing I started was music. I was obsessed with metal and rock music from childhood. First, I played classical and electric guitar for years, but for some reason I found that it didn't satisfy me the way I expected in terms of self-expression. So I decided to change my medium. Without any background in visual art, I entered the University of Tehran to start my BFA in painting, even though my major in high school was mathematics and physics. Since then, I started working on my portrait. At first, I painted and drew my portrait every day to capture and study the changes in my face over time. Then self-portraiture became something deeper. I started focusing on my insecurities about my appearance. And I also worked on my environment to analyze my life more and more. It was like I needed to be addicted to something. And it actually became an addiction because I got caught in a spiral of not enough. I wanted to feel something rather than just express myself. That was why I pursued self-portraiture. It was never ever about what I was achieving, but about how it made me feel. And over time, my portrait became like a shadow in my paintings. I realized I was doing this unconsciously because I could feel that I was not the core of my own life. I was acting as a shadow. And I even noticed that my color palette, which was so dark and mainly made up with violet shades, was chosen unconsciously for reasons that connected to my mental state at that time. This was the first time I realized that I was in a process that was completely different. It was very similar to psychoanalysis. It was exactly what I needed, and it was an answer to one of my initial questions, which was, what is art for? After that, my art practice became a process of psychoanalysis. So I'm going to show you some examples of my work. They're not all of my work that I've done, just some examples to make my process more clear for you. This collection called Cenotaph was created during a very difficult time. I had a hard time writing what I truly needed to express, but I couldn't say it out loud. These works are made from my writings during my hardest moments on papers stained with body oil and blood from my body injuries. I created these after battling deeply with myself, and the result, I think, was powerful. I feel like the weight on my mind had become significantly lighter, and the bloodiness in this series continued into my next series. A very sharp shade of reddish was added to my palette. I even dyed my hair red at that time. My next series was a review of the stories and traumas I had experienced at the time. I painted them from my own perspective, the way I saw them in my mind. The psychoanalytic process I started made me feel even more depressed because I had to revisit every trauma, overanalyze and overthink everything in my head. At the same time, I felt that as long as I was getting to know myself better and answering my unanswered questions, I was getting closer to myself, and I was less in tension. As a result, I created a series of self-portraits with multiple figures of myself, which helped me focus more on my relationship with myself. But very soon, I became alone in my paintings. I was too curious to understand what was truly wrong with me. So I began a kind of something called self-dissection in psychoanalysis. But it was not a choice, it just happened unconsciously. During this time, I found another answer to one of my questions about myself. After mentioning it to my doctor, I was diagnosed with ADHD after 26 years and after visiting many therapists. I mean, in the end, self-portraiture and self-psychoanalysis were the only thing that helped me discover this. Psychoanalysis is a difficult process that affects every part of your life. I felt like I was healing and hurting myself at the same time. The red shape in my work gradually shifted into a sharp pink. For me, pink at that time represented healing. It was like red that has been healed. I also started incorporating symbols like snakes, which in some cultures represents healing. These works depict self, someone who has suspended herself in order to gain knowledge. The figures are shown as observers, with snakes crawling from different parts of the body, sometimes even from inside to out. On the other hand, healing may seem to suggest ultimate surrender, sacrifice, or being suspended in time. But in reality, it reflects a need to pause certain actions in situations I was not happy with, symbolizing the embrace of a different perspective. I even tried this in a different medium for the first time. In this work, my portrait expression is calm and placid. The black color I choose represents darkness and the darkest part of the mind. So now I want to jump quickly to the work I've created here since I started my MFA. When I started my MFA and began working in the studio, I struggled not with just making art, with myself in the process. In the first year, I never felt satisfied with any of my work. Working on the idea of self only made it even harder. I felt like I had lost my sense of identity, like I didn't really know who I was or where I belonged. Moving to a new country only added to that feeling of disorientation. Second year, though, was so different. I mean, I was on the cusp of so many changes. A lot of changes happened in my work over these 1.5 years. These are the pieces I created for my MFA intensive show last year. You'll notice that the snakes in my work are still present as a symbol of something internal, but they've changed. Unlike in my earlier works where they emerged from inside the figure, they now appear more detached, crawling loosely around the body. It's a present, something that lingers and at times added pressure. I also drew snake-like forms directly onto the gallery walls with graphite. I didn't want them to be something like a focal point to my work. Instead, they were meant to exist kind of invisible, only becoming visible when the light caught them at certain angles, almost like something that's there but only reveals itself when you shift your perspective. Then I removed the symbolic elements. It wasn't a fully conscious decision, but something that came from how I was feeling at the time. I felt like I was in a battle with myself, searching for something within, trying to grasp it. The multiple figures in my work reflects the multiple voices in my head, a kind of inner dialogue or conflict. I was in a state of trying to rid myself of something, searching for a solution, pushing, killing off, or surpassing certain parts of me. But I realized it was futile, as if I was only hurting myself, creating wounds that might be even harder to heal later. This painting looked different at first, but later I decided to change the background to something completely flat. I wanted to shift the focus to the overall form of the tangled figures, which began to take on the shape of a lake, something that I'll explain in my later work. So I thought maybe it was the time to move on from figures and step out of my comfort zone. I started painting a lake near my home. When I first moved into my new apartment last year, I hated everything about it. Even the view felt like a disaster. But as winter ended and the snow began to melt, a lake slowly revealed itself outside my window. It felt like a reflection of everything I had been going through at the time. I found myself drawn to it, watching it constantly. And eventually I started walking to the lake almost every day. But I could never get too close to the lake. In these paintings, I initially just focused on capturing the scene itself, but in the end I added a tiny figure of myself, so small that it's barely visible. You have to really look closely to find it. The figures are hidden in the details because I didn't want them to be the main subject. In one of these works, I even pushed myself further by using a completely different color palette, something like breaking away from the shades I had relied on for years. I think that shift felt huge for me at that time. This shift made me realize that I needed something more than just figures in my self-portraits. That's when I started incorporating writing, using the same shapes and movements I'd used to paint the details of the water in the lake. These pieces consist of 32 individual parts. It's a continuous text in Persian. I wrote everything I had obsessively analyzed about the past trauma, letting the sentences flow without stopping. The writing never ends. It's just continuous, layer upon layer. It took me almost 32 hours to complete, with each new line written over the last, creating a dense, unreadable texture. Even for those who understand Persian, because I didn't want them to be something legible. Water acts as a surface, a boundary between what is visible and what remains hidden beneath. Everything under the water exists in the deep and in the dark. It's concealed from immediate view. This mirrors a psychoanalytic approach to the mind, where the surface represents conscious awareness, while deeper layers hold submerged thoughts, memories, and emotions. Just as one must look beyond the water's reflection to view what lies below. Understanding the self requires digging beneath appearance, uncovering what is hidden beneath the surface. After finishing this process, I felt like weight in my mind had shifted, like something had been released. This approach also reminded me of something called siyah mashq in Persian language, or in translation, I don't know if it's right or not, but it's translated to black practice, a form of Persian calligraphic practice where the page is completely covered with the writing. In a way, my work follows that tradition, but instead of practicing letters, I was unloading thoughts. Since my last piece was written on water or with water, I became obsessed with the concept of water itself. In this work, I started repeatedly writing a short phrase, "I'm here," almost like a wish to exist within the lake. Sometimes I mirrored the text. It's again in Persian, and the act of writing and repeating words is also rooted in siyah mashq that I told before, the black practice tradition. This piece consists of 3 wooden panels. I wrote directly onto the lake surface using graphite, emphasizing the idea of reflection, both visually and conceptually. In Persian miniature painting, it's so common that artists using silver to depicting water, and over time silver would oxidize and change, and it became a color shade of something like a black or things like this. Graphite behaves similarly, slowly transforming as it reacts with its surrounding. I also incorporated my own hair into the work, using it to represent grass. I wanted a physical part of my body to be attached to the piece, making my presence more tangible, almost as if I were embedding myself into the landscape. This one is a bit different from my previous practices. If my earlier writings functioned as self-portrait, this one began the same way, but then took another direction. I started writing, but instead of leaving the text as it was, I folded the paper in a way similar to certain Eastern tradition where written spells are folded before being carried or placed somewhere. I'm not deeply familiar or interested with these practices, but at the time, I had this overwhelming feeling that my life had been spelled, as if something unseen was shaping my path. So instinctively, I began folding the writing. Then I dipped it in water and washed it away. I didn't fully understand why I was doing this in the moment, but I knew I wanted to wash everything away, erasing something or erasing myself, letting something go. I scrambled and crumbled the paper as if it were fabric, letting the ink dissolve and blend into the material itself. Once it dried, I painted over it and with a sharp pink, a color I repeatedly used as a symbol of healing. In a way, this process mirrors psychoanalysis, uncovering, deconstructing, and then attempting to mend what remains. After everything has been washed away and covered with healing, the question remains: does it still look the same? This piece started with a canvas I found last year. I began working on it, but every time I look at it, I hated the result. I painted over it and covered it up 7 times, and people around me kept telling me to just leave it, and since it seems like I could never be satisfied with this canvas. After a year, I finally became daring enough to destroy it, and I cut the canvas into 4 inches square pieces. I then washed each pieces with water, and this process for me reflects something deeply psychoanalytic, almost like trying to break down an overwhelming experience into smaller, more manageable parts. The act of cutting and washing, of reworking something repeatedly, is a form of self-examination, a way to get rid of layers until you can see what's beneath. Even though the pieces now look like a pile of small canvases, I still consider the work itself. It's in a fragmented state, but perhaps that's part of its meaning. I'm still considering how to install it though. The presentation will likely evolve depending on how I want to express the work's complexity and transformation. This piece is one of my most recent works created for our MFA intensive show last month. The initial idea came from a period when I was experiencing brain fog, a state where everything in my mind felt covered by a thick, impenetrable layer. Time, location, and even events around me became unclear, as if I were detached from reality. Instead of writing as I had done in my previous works, this time I simply washed blank papers with water and ink. I had nothing in my mind to put into words, so the process itself became the focus. Initially, I thought of shaping the composition like the lake I had worked on before, though only in its overall form. Maybe it was a conscious response, something like a way of maintaining a connection with my previous series. The piece is made of multiple layers of washed paper stacked on top of one another, creating a sense of depth and obscurity. I think there is also a connection to the snake concept that appeared in my past works. The layered paper in this piece are reminiscent of a snake shedding its skin, a metaphor for renewal and transformation. Just as a snake discards its old skin to allow for growth, the act of washing, raising, and layering the paper reflects a process of shading, a cycle of letting go and beginning again. In psychoanalysis, the mind is often understood as layered. Memories, emotions, and unconscious thoughts buried beneath the surface, shaping our perception without us always being aware of them. The layering in this work reflects that structure, with some parts more visible and others hidden beneath. The way the layers shift and hover over each other also speaks to instability, things moving and changing, sometimes revealing themselves, sometimes retreating into obscurity. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nazli. On top of everything, to be the first one in our series is a very daring thing to do. And I know it's also especially difficult to be in a so-called environmentally controlled space that is quite steamy. So it's not just your nerves, it's much more humid in this room than most spaces. Thank you so much for sharing that path with us. And absolutely, we know it was not all the work you've ever made.
Yeah, thank you
but
so much.
You did
as
a
well.
beautiful job of bringing forward some of those most critical decisions you've made and arriving at a very distinct space, and this washing of the materiality is such a stunning effect. There's an opportunity for questions if people have them. Yes, I'm going to ask you to speak into the microphone if you don't mind. It's my dream come true of being Oprah, so.
Hi, Nazli. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I was so impressed with the themes and the materials and scale. It's really, really beautiful to see the presentation. So I noticed in some of your most recent work, you have things listed as mixed media on canvas or wood. I was just curious if you could share what some of those mediums were. I'm just curious about the mark making.
I'm not sure which were. First, hi Joseph. Thank you for coming here. I'm not sure which work are you mentioning.
Some of the images of the lakes and things like that.
Okay, okay.
Listed specifically as mixed media, and you
Okay.
indicated on some other ones what the mixed media was, but I was just curious.
You told us about the hair,
Yeah.
but there's other things that are in there too. So, like,
Yeah.
what are the other things once you started to move away from the graphite, the silver point reference, the idea of
Yeah.
building this texture up in a very unique way?
Yeah, I mixed a kind of gesso with sand for the around the space, and the water surface is just with gesso, and I just wrote with graphite on top. But I used my own hair for just showing the grass texture around the lake. Yeah, did I answer the question? Okay, that was so easy. Yeah.
Hi, Nasli. Thanks so much for your fabulous talk. It's been so wonderful to get to experience the progression of your work over the last year and a half. And I'm curious about, because you shifted away from representational self-portraits into this act of washing and also the lake, which I actually see as almost even more personal and relating to the body, because you're physically using your body through the labor of washing the paper. So I'd love for you to address that. And I'm also curious, do you feel a sense of a lightening through the work? Like, because you spoke about having kind of a release of some of the kind of anxiety, maybe for lack of a better term, when you were doing some of the paintings early on. So I'm curious about that with this new work and the washing, if it's cathartic for you, or maybe tell us a little bit more about the process of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for the question. It's a really good question. And last night I was thinking about this process as well, because I think since last year I was working on my self-portrait, and I think now, unless I'm working on my portrait, I'm not on my portrait, on myself, it's not about self-portrait. It's like I'm depicting something about maybe an episode of mental, maybe something like, I don't know, maybe something like a concept maybe, but it's just, I'm using myself like a model to depicting this, to analyzing everything, and I'm using myself to test maybe. I'm just, yeah, this is the part, but I don't know what you're looking for. The process, how it happened.
But also how you see, do you still see yourself being present in this new work in the same way? Do you still see them as self-portraits, I guess? And then also, is it still with the psychoanalysis, do you still feel a kind of a lightening of spirit in moving through this more recent work like it did in the past?
Yeah, I see. That's why I couldn't answer it clearly, because it's a question for myself as well, because first I thought these are counting as self-portrait, but now I'm thinking that it's more about the concept of something, not about self-portrait. But still it can be self-portrait, but I think maybe for later I'm going to shift it. And although I'm gonna working on myself, but it's not going to be something necessarily like a self-portrait, like just using myself, just creating something from my own and daily experiences. But I think the process was something like this. I think that helped me a lot to get rid of just doing self-portrait, because that's really a frustrating process I started. Sorry. It's a sad presentation, I'm so sorry.
You mentioned when you were describing the self-portraiture how painful it was. Like you didn't know if you were causing yourself more harm or exercising that pain. And I really appreciate your question, Lisa, talking about the washing of those papers, as opposed to making a picture of something and embodying in so much of your action, like you're painting your brush strokes, your like all of your paintings are very embodied and active in that space. And then it's very interesting to imagine this washing, how you got to this washing technique. And I agree with you very much, Lisa, about this very personal act of care and then this labor towards that shape. It's quite interesting. Excuse me, Ella?
Hi, Nestle. I was really impressed by your talk. It wove a beautiful story towards this point, which I think is quite rare. I mean, this is my first MFA talk I've been to here, but wow. Anyway, kind of picking up some of the threads that Lisa just spoke about in terms of this move away from the representational space. And I'm wondering, in part, if when we're representing a body, there's a distance between us and that body. There's a distanciation, or like, it's, in other words, a kind of like a simile. In English, we say, like, this is like that. But with this new work, I think why we're sort of almost seeing it akin to a self-portrait, but it's doing something quite different. It's almost more like, it is this. Like, it is your body. It's not like your body. It's not a depiction of your body. It is of your body. And I'm wondering if that resonates with you, if I'm on the right track. I'm trying to form this into a question, but I'm just wondering if that's what I'm picking up here.
Yeah. Hi, Ella. Thank you so much. Yeah, you're right. But at the same time, I think we can look at it in a reverse form, because even when I used to work on my body and figures of myself, it wasn't about the body. It was about something about mental condition, something about mind, something about the concept of trying to psychoanalyzing my mind, my mental health, something like this, but making it into something more abstracted. I think they're so similar to each other, but just the appearances look different. Yeah.
Gabby and then Jennifer.
So last year it was on like wood as a base instead of canvas, and then you're washing lots of paper and like materials. So like, how does it feel? I guess with like wood you can't wash wood, I guess, and then washing paper. So how does it feel, like that shift of background, or that shift of a ground from wood being so solid to now you're washing stuff all away, I guess, like almost like erasure in a way. So how does that feel, a shift?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, hi, Gabby. And yeah, that's a good question again. Because I started painting, I used to using canvas and wood I'm really obsessed with using wood as a surface for painting with oils. But for a period that I showed before I am starting my MFA, I was started writing on papers, and then I washed them with bloods and things like this. It's like a return, but the quality of both them, you can wash the wood as well, but it's not acting, and the reading would be different in your work when you're working with a different material like paper. For me, paper is more like more close to the skin quality, more close to the concept of snakes that they were shedding, yeah.
Go ahead.
Is it working? Hi. Hi. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. I think you did a wonderful job just describing your process, and especially connecting the work from last year to this year, and that you articulated all that process so well, so thank you. My question, because I haven't seen this work, I've seen your work last year and then your recent piece, but this piece, I think you described it, but I'm very interested in the use of text, in the introduction of language into the process, and that while it's still about you, it's still involved in this kind of relationship to the body, a sense of identity. So I'm really interested in the role of language, especially because you're connecting it with psychoanalysis, and language is a really important, it's very fundamental in the formation of self and identity. And so this process of writing the language that you are living in 2 different languages, home and here. So I'm just wondering if that's something that you've thought about, or if you have any ideas about that, bringing language and text into it.
Yeah, hi Jennifer. Thank you, that's a good question. When we're thinking about the idea of self and mind that I started to showing in my work, it's like when I started writing in my work, I was writing the thoughts in my head. So when I'm thinking in Persian. I'm not thinking in English. So my thoughts are in Persian. But I think we can make a connection of something culturally, because I'm using some Persian methods that I told something like black practice, but I didn't thought about it. The only thing that was matter was my thought that I was thinking about. The initial thought was the self, was something actually that is passing through my mind. Yeah. Thank you.
I know it seems ridiculous, but we're already we're hitting that moment where people might have to go back to school. So I would like to ask you all to once again congratulate Nazli Topki for this incredible presentation and for being our first out of the gate. Congratulations very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I also want to remind people that when artists do their MFA, the thesis is the exhibition. So when they let you into this kind of processual approach and have this research presentation, it really is just an introduction to what will be the work to come. And while these research conversations are happening here at the Kenderdine Gallery, there's 3 more to come. So same bat channel, same bat place. And it really is such an incredible opportunity to get this witness into both language and objects and images that then will result in the actual work at the thesis exhibitions to come in August and September. So I want to thank you all again so much for coming. And you've set the bar high, Ms. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And everybody's welcome just to stay and have a more casual